Imagine this. A man walks into a busy international airport on a warm afternoon. The place is buzzing with travelers, families dragging heavy suitcases, business professionals glued to their phones, children laughing as they chase each other near the check-in counters. But in the middle of all that noise and movement, one figure stands out. His name is Marcus Hill, though very few in that terminal would recognize him. To them, he was just another passenger. But behind the polished shoes, the crisp navy blue suit, and the calm confidence in his stride, was a man who had built an empire from scratch. A man who had gone from sleeping in a tiny one-room apartment to owning one of the largest tech companies in the world. A man whose decisions could shift markets overnight. Yet in this very moment, none of that mattered. He approached the gate holding a first-class boarding pass. Not economy, not business, first class. It was a ticket he had booked weeks in advance, something he barely thought about. For Marcus, comfort was not a luxury, it was an expectation. He had meetings lined up after this flight, a packed schedule as always, and this first-class ticket was just another step in his carefully planned routine. But life has a way of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate attendant, Marcus expected the usual nod of approval. The polite, "Have a good flight, sir." Instead, the young woman behind the counter frowned. She scanned the ticket twice, then looked at Marcus with an expression that made the air around them grow heavy. Her voice, flat and dismissive, cut through the noise of the terminal. "I'm sorry, sir. This seat isn't available to you. First class is reserved for our elite passengers. You'll need to step aside." For a moment, Marcus thought he had misheard her. He glanced at his ticket, seat 2A, clearly marked first class. But when he looked up, the attendant's expression hadn't changed. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't apologizing. She was shutting him down, as if his presence in the first-class line was some kind of mistake. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A few passengers waiting nearby leaned in, pretending not to eavesdrop but clearly curious. Whispers traveled quickly. Why was this man with a valid ticket in his hand being told he didn't belong? Marcus didn't raise his voice. Instead, he asked calmly, "Could you check again? This is my confirmed seat." But before the attendant could even reply, another passenger walked up, a man dressed casually in a t-shirt and jeans, holding his phone in one hand. Without a word, she smiled at him, scanned his ticket, and waved him through to first class. No questions, no doubts, no hesitation. The contrast was undeniable. Marcus was standing there with a ticket that guaranteed him the best seat on the plane, yet he was being blocked, as if he were trespassing. Meanwhile, others passed him effortlessly, receiving the kind of treatment he was being denied. It wasn't just a mistake. It was something deeper, and Marcus felt the weight of it in his chest. The humiliation wasn't in the words alone, but in the eyes of the people around him. Some stared openly, waiting to see how he would react. Others quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. But Marcus could feel their silent judgment pressing down on him. It wasn't just about being denied a seat. It was about being told in the most public way possible, "You don't belong here." He could have argued. He could have raised his voice, demanded to see a supervisor, or slammed his ticket down on the counter. But that wasn't Marcus Hill. Instead, he straightened his posture, locked eyes with the attendant, and asked a single question that carried more weight than any outburst could. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" The attendant didn't flinch. She nodded firmly, her tone sharp, almost annoyed. "Yes, sir. Step aside. You'll need to fly in economy." And just like that, the whispers grew louder. The humiliation was complete. A billionaire who had quietly walked into the airport expecting nothing more than a smooth flight had just been reduced, in front of strangers, to a man fighting for a seat he had already paid for. But what no one in that terminal knew, what the attendant, the passengers, and even the airline staff didn't realize, was that they had just picked the wrong man to embarrass. Because Marcus Hill was not simply another passenger. He was not a man who took disrespect lightly. In less than 30 minutes, their world would turn upside down. And every single person in that gate area would remember this flight for the rest of their lives. Marcus stood at the counter, his fingers tightening slightly around the boarding pass. On paper, it was undeniable. His name, his seat number, his ticket class. But the people standing in front of him were treating that piece of paper like it meant nothing at all. The crowd around the gate had gone quieter now, though the sound of rolling suitcases and boarding announcements echoed faintly in the background. The real drama was unfolding right there at the check-in desk. Trying once more to settle the matter, Marcus leaned forward and said calmly, "This is my confirmed seat. It's on the boarding pass. If there's an issue, maybe it's a system error. Could you double-check?" The attendant avoided his gaze. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and before she could answer, another figure appeared. An older man in a pressed airline uniform, clearly the gate manager. His walk was brisk, his jaw tight, as if he had already decided Marcus was the problem before even arriving. "What seems to be the issue?" the manager asked, his tone sharp. The attendant handed over Marcus's ticket like it was contaminated. "He insists this is his seat in first class, but it doesn't look right. I told him to move to economy." The manager scanned the ticket, frowned, then looked Marcus up and down slowly. That glance wasn't about paperwork. It was about judgment. Then came the words that made the crowd stir with unease. "Sir, please don't cause a scene. You'll need to accept the seat we're giving you in economy. First class is for our premium clients and—" He paused for a second, his eyes narrowing. "You don't fit the profile." The silence that followed was deafening. Those 4 words, "don't fit the profile," hung in the air like smoke from a fire. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Marcus with sympathy, while others turned away, unwilling to be part of the unfolding storm. It was a moment heavy with meaning, and everyone knew it. Marcus took a breath, his composure unshaken. He wasn't just hearing a refusal. He was hearing the weight of prejudice wrapped in corporate arrogance. Still, he kept his voice steady. "I purchased this seat fairly. I have the right to sit where I paid to sit." The manager's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Sir, listen. We have regular clients in first class, people who belong there. I don't want to repeat myself. If you'd like to fly today, you'll take the economy seat we're offering. Otherwise, you're welcome to step aside and wait for another flight." It was as if the manager was daring him to resist, daring him to make a scene so they could label him a troublemaker. And yet Marcus didn't give them the satisfaction. He studied the man for a long moment before asking, in a voice that cut through the growing whispers around them, "Are you certain that's your final decision?" The manager didn't blink. He crossed his arms, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Yes, now please don't hold up the line." Behind Marcus, more passengers were beginning to murmur. Some pulled out their phones, quietly recording. They had just seen one passenger walk into first class without a single problem. Yet here was another being denied, despite holding the same ticket. The injustice of it was obvious, and the whispers carried that truth across the terminal. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't waver. Instead of anger, a small, knowing smile crept across his face. He slid the boarding pass back into his pocket and stepped to the side. To the staff, it must have looked like surrender, as if they had put him in his place. The attendant exchanged a smug glance with her manager, as though the matter had been settled, but Marcus wasn't defeated. Far from it. His silence was louder than any argument he could have made. Because in that moment, he wasn't just thinking about the insult he had endured. He was already planning what would happen next. And while the staff believed they had the upper hand, what they didn't realize was that their careers had just been decided in that very exchange. Passengers nearby continued to watch him closely. Some wondered why he wasn't fighting harder. Others whispered that maybe he had no choice. But Marcus knew something they didn't. He wasn't powerless here. In fact, he held more power than anyone else in that terminal. By refusing him his seat, the staff thought they had stripped him of his dignity. Instead, they had handed him the perfect opportunity to expose their arrogance and make a statement that would echo far beyond the walls of that airport. What looked like quiet retreat was, in reality, the calm before a storm that would arrive faster and hit harder than anyone could have imagined. In less than 30 minutes, the smug smiles at that counter would vanish. The manager's arrogance would turn into desperation, and the same crowd that now watched Marcus with pity would soon be staring in awe at the man who had just taught an entire airline the most unforgettable lesson of their lives. Marcus moved away from the counter with deliberate calm, each step measured, each movement calculated. To the staff, it looked like he had accepted defeat, as though he was just another passenger forced to swallow humiliation and move on. But if they had paid closer attention, they would have noticed something unusual about the way he walked, how his expression hadn't twisted in anger, how his body language carried no shame. Instead, he radiated a quiet confidence, the kind that came from knowing he wasn't the one who would lose in the end. He slipped his hand into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black phone. The device wasn't just a phone, it was his command center, a tool that connected him instantly to his empire. With a few taps, he scrolled to a private contact labeled only with a single word: executive. Without hesitation, he pressed dial. The call connected almost immediately. On the other end, a calm voice said, "Yes, Mr. Hill?" Marcus didn't waste a second. "Activate Protocol 1, he instructed, his tone sharp and controlled. "I'll handle the rest when I arrive." There was no argument, no confusion, only a crisp, "Understood, sir," before the line went dead. To the passengers nearby, it looked like a routine phone call. No one could have guessed what had just been set in motion. But for Marcus, those 3 words, "activate protocol," one were enough to unleash a ripple of consequences that would soon engulf the very airline staff who had humiliated him. What the attendants and their manager didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a customer. He wasn't simply a man with a first-class ticket. He was, in fact, the majority shareholder of the airline itself. His tech company had quietly acquired a controlling stake in the airline months ago, part of a strategic expansion that gave him not just influence, but direct authority over its operations. In other words, the people who had treated him with disdain were, without realizing it, disrespecting their own boss. Marcus tucked the phone back into his pocket, his face unreadable. Around him, the terminal continued to buzz with routine activity. Families juggled luggage, announcements crackled over the speakers, and first-class passengers continued to stroll past the gate agents with ease. But beneath that ordinary surface, something extraordinary was brewing. A few of the onlookers who had witnessed the confrontation whispered nervously. One young woman leaned toward her companion and muttered, "Did you see that? He had the ticket. Why wouldn't they let him board?" Her friend shrugged, shaking his head. "Doesn't make sense. Maybe it's about, you know." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavily in the air. Some passengers had already pulled out their phones, capturing shaky footage of the incident. The manager's dismissive tone, the blatant unfairness, the way Marcus had been denied what was rightfully his, it was all recorded. At first, the videos were just a way for people to vent or share outrage later. But those recordings would soon become powerful evidence of what had really happened at Gate 14. Meanwhile, the staff continued on as if nothing unusual had occurred. The attendant chuckled softly with her colleague, convinced she had put Marcus in his place. The manager straightened his tie, pleased with how he had asserted authority. To them, Marcus was just another difficult passenger who had been successfully handled. They didn't realize that their smug smiles were being watched by the very man who now held their futures in his hands. Marcus sat down in one of the nearby lounge chairs, his posture relaxed, almost casual. But inside his mind, calculations were unfolding rapidly. He thought of the values his company stood for: innovation, excellence, respect. And here, in one of the most public spaces his airline operated, those values had been shattered by arrogance and prejudice. It wasn't just a personal insult anymore. It was a violation of everything he had built. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, his watch gleaming under the terminal lights. 30 minutes, that was all it would take. 30 minutes before the executives he had called would arrive. 30 minutes before the staff who had mocked him would realize the truth. 30 minutes before this ordinary gate became the stage for an extraordinary revelation. Passengers nearby glanced at him occasionally, trying to read his expression. To them, he looked too calm, too composed for a man who had just been denied his seat. Some assumed he was simply giving up. Others wondered if he had a hidden plan. What none of them knew was that they were about to witness a story that would travel far beyond the walls of that airport. A story that would go viral, spark debates, and teach a lesson about respect, power, and justice. Marcus didn't need to argue. He didn't need to raise his voice. The staff had already written the ending of their own careers the moment they chose arrogance over professionalism. All Marcus had to do now was wait for the clock to run out. And as the seconds ticked by, the quiet man in the navy blue suit prepared himself for the moment he would no longer be seen as just a passenger, but as the man who owned the skies they thought they controlled. 30 minutes later, the atmosphere at the gate had shifted in ways no one could quite explain. Passengers had boarded most of the economy section, while the first-class lounge still bustled with attendants offering champagne and warm towels. The staff who had humiliated Marcus were still going about their duties, laughing among themselves, convinced the situation was over. They didn't realize the countdown on their careers had already begun. The quiet hum of conversation was suddenly interrupted by the sharp click of polished shoes echoing across the terminal floor. Heads turned. A group of executives in tailored suits appeared, moving quickly and with authority. Their expressions were serious, their presence commanding. Trailing behind them were two members of corporate security, their postures straight, their eyes scanning the scene with intent. The passengers who had witnessed the earlier drama sat up straighter, sensing something extraordinary was about to unfold. At the center of it all was Marcus, still seated calmly in the lounge chair, his posture relaxed but his aura unmistakably powerful. As the executives approached, he rose slowly, his movements deliberate. Like a king reclaiming his throne, the lead executive, a tall woman with steel-gray hair and a sharp voice, addressed the staff loudly enough for everyone in the area to hear. "We are here to address a serious violation that has just taken place at this gate." Her eyes swept across the attendants and then landed on the manager. The color drained from his face. He shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the smug confidence he wore earlier was slipping away. Passengers whispered frantically, phones lifted discreetly to capture the unfolding moment. The tension in the air was electric, every second stretching longer than the last. The executive gestured toward Marcus. "This man whom you insulted, denied service to, and treated with open disrespect, is Mr. Marcus Hill." She paused, letting the name sink in. Some passengers gasped. Others looked at each other in disbelief. The staff, however, looked as though the floor had been pulled out from beneath them. "Mr. Hill," the executive continued, her voice firm, "is not only a valued client, but he is also the CEO and majority shareholder of this airline. In other words, he is your boss." The words landed like thunder. The attendants froze, their smiles collapsing into horror. The manager's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked from Marcus to the executives, then back again, as if scrambling for a lifeline that didn't exist. Marcus finally stepped forward, his calm voice slicing through the silence. "I gave you a chance to correct your mistake. I asked you clearly, twice, if you were sure about your decision. Instead of treating me with dignity, you doubled down on arrogance and discrimination." He let the words hang in the air, making sure every person in the terminal could hear. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, some even clapping quietly in support. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the stunned faces of the very employees who had mocked Marcus less than an hour ago. He turned his gaze to the staff, his tone sharp but measured. "This airline represents more than flights and tickets. It represents values, respect, professionalism, integrity. And when you choose prejudice over professionalism, you fail not just the customer, but the company itself. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties." Gasps rippled through the terminal as security stepped forward. The once arrogant manager raised his hands in protest. "Wait, sir. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't know. Please." His voice cracked, desperation flooding his words. But Marcus didn't flinch. "That's the problem," he replied coldly. "You didn't care to know. You judged first and you judged wrong. And now, you'll face the consequences." Security escorted the attendants and the manager away as they pleaded for another chance. The sight was surreal. Moments ago, these people had exuded arrogance and superiority. Now, they were reduced to frantic voices fading into the distance. Applause broke out among the passengers. Some clapped politely, while others cheered openly, thrilled to witness such swift justice. Videos captured the moment from every angle, ensuring that within hours, the entire world would see the dramatic unmasking of power and prejudice at Gate 14. Marcus stood still for a moment, allowing the applause to wash over the space. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. Instead, his face remained calm, almost solemn, as if reminding everyone that this was bigger than revenge. This was about principle. He turned once more to the passengers, his voice steady and commanding. Every person deserves respect when they walk into this terminal, no matter how they look, where they come from, or what you assume about them. Today wasn't just about me. It was about the values this company stands for. And I will never allow those values to be compromised. The clapping grew louder, filling the air with a sense of triumph. The very space that had moments ago felt heavy with humiliation, now buzzed with energy, admiration, and a sense of justice being served. Marcus adjusted his suit jacket and handed his boarding pass to a senior executive, who immediately escorted him to the jet bridge. The staff along the way bowed their heads respectfully, some whispering apologies, others simply watching in awe. And as Marcus walked toward the aircraft, he carried with him not just the authority of ownership, but the satisfaction of knowing he had turned their arrogance into a lesson the entire world would remember. The gate area still buzzed with the energy of what had just unfolded. Passengers sat stunned in their seats, some whispering in disbelief, others replaying the scene they had just witnessed over and over in their minds. A few were already uploading videos to social media, their captions filled with shock and awe. Within minutes, hashtags and short clips would spread across the internet. But in that moment, the people at Gate 14 knew they had been part of something that would never be forgotten. Marcus stood before the crowd, his presence commanding attention without effort. He didn't raise his voice, yet every ear in the terminal seemed tuned to his words. "Let this moment remind all of us," he said, his tone calm but unshakably firm, "that respect is not a luxury. It is a right. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity, whether they arrive in a suit, jeans, or overalls, whether they own the company or not. The uniform you wear doesn't give you the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't. Respect is the foundation of service. Without it, this airline has no future." The applause that followed was thunderous. It wasn't the polite clapping you hear after an announcement. It was raw, emotional, almost cathartic. People cheered, whistled, and shouted words of support. Some even rose from their seats, giving Marcus a standing ovation. For those who had seen him humiliated just half an hour earlier, the turnaround felt almost surreal. One woman near the back of the lounge, holding her phone high to record, shouted, "That's how you stand up to discrimination." Her voice was swallowed by the roar of agreement around her. Another man shook his head in amazement, muttering to his wife, "I've flown 100 times and never seen anything like this." That man just made history. Marcus, however, didn't bask in the applause. His expression was thoughtful, his tone measured. This wasn't about proving his power or embarrassing a handful of employees. It was about setting a precedent. He knew that thousands of airline staff across the globe would soon see these videos, and he wanted them to walk away with a lesson they'd never forget. "This isn't just about me," he continued, his eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's about every traveler who has ever been told they don't belong. About every person who's been judged before they were understood. If we want to build a world of fairness, we must start here, with the simple act of respect." His words lingered in the air, heavy with truth. The same crowd that had once whispered about him with pity now looked at him with admiration, some even with tears in their eyes. This wasn't just a business executive giving a speech. It was a man using his power to make a stand for something greater. As Marcus was escorted down the jet bridge, the cameras followed. He walked with the steady confidence of someone who had not only reclaimed his dignity, but also reshaped the narrative. For the airline staff who had underestimated him, 30 minutes of arrogance had erased years of employment. For Marcus, 30 minutes of patience had revealed the true weight of his influence. Once inside the aircraft, he settled into seat 2A, his rightful first-class seat. The leather felt softer than usual, the space larger, the silence sweeter. As he fastened his seatbelt, he glanced out the window, watching the ground crew move about, unaware of the drama that had just shaken their airline's reputation. A faint smile touched his lips, not one of triumph but of satisfaction. The message had been sent, loud and clear. Back in the terminal, the story was already spiraling outward. Passengers who had witnessed it live were giving play-by-play accounts to friends and family on the phone. Social media platforms lit up with videos titled, "CEO Fires Airline Staff on the Spot," and "Gate 14 Lesson in Respect." Within hours, millions would see the footage. News outlets would pick it up, analysts would dissect it, and people from every corner of the world would debate it. But no matter how it was retold, one truth remained unshakable. Marcus Hill had turned humiliation into history. As the plane lifted off the runway, Marcus leaned back, his eyes briefly closing. He wasn't thinking about the viral videos, the applause, or even the firings. He was thinking about the bigger picture, the culture he wanted his airline to represent. Not arrogance, not prejudice, but excellence built on equality. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a larger movement to reshape the values of the industry he now controlled. For those who had been at Gate 14, the lesson was clear. You never know who you are speaking to, and you never know the weight of your actions. A single decision, one rooted in bias and arrogance, had cost several employees everything. And for Marcus Hill, a single moment of calm patience had given him the chance to send a message the world would never forget. The skies outside glowed with the last golden light of the evening. And as the jet climbed higher, Marcus whispered to himself, "Respect. That's the first-class ticket everyone deserves."